Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining me on this Zoom meeting for the Check Your Head podcast. It's all about mental health and musicians, and your story is so perfect. And for the theme of the podcast, and also I've been listening to Mystic uh, all this morning and just really learning more about your story and doing all the research. But so thank you so much for not only the album and the lyrics, but also just speaking out on mental health. It's so important.
Hey, thank you, for allowing me to join you on this amazing platform. I love what you guys do, what you represent. I think it's really, really beautiful. And thank you for, first of all, listening to my album. I love this album. It means everything to me. And every time someone takes time out of their valuable time out of their day to care about it, it means the world to me. I'm really fortunate to have a platform where I get to speak on something that's important to me and I believe should be important to everyone, like mental health. And so I'm really
sorry about that. Hold on.
fine.
Good thing about our podcast is that everything can get edited out. So
Exactly right.
I apologize. Hold on.
Oh, Angel.
Okay.
Yes.
This
So
is gonna be better.
the end of my last sentence.
You were saying about how you were so thankful that you have a platform to speak on mental health.
Absolutely. It's so important to me. I really believe it should be a priority for everyone. I don't believe that. It's just a fact that it should be. It's not just about belief. And to create something like Mystic that seems to be kind of resonating with people in some way or another has been just a privilege. So again, thank you for even letting me talk. It's always surprising. It's always surprising to me when people, care about what I have to say, because I'm just like, I always say, I'm just a formally suicidal, ragingly bipolar kid who's trying my best to survive day to day. And the fact that anyone cares about what I have to say is remarkable to me,
Yeah, well, I have gone through my own depression and anxiety, and I kind of went through my own sort of breakdown around the same time that you did. And I think a lot of mine had to do with hormones, which, I think can also play a part. But so I completely understand, like, some of the things that you talk about are really familiar to me. And I think it's important to kind of explain that, because I think when you're in it, let's say, a breakdown or a depression, it's hard for somebody who hasn't gone through it to understand, just like the thoughts that go through your head.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm so sorry that you relate and understand it. That's very sad, to put it as lightly as possible. It's devastating, but I'm so proud of you for being here and making it through a period like that. Like, that's incredible. And I hope you're as proud of yourself as you should be. But, it is hard to articulate our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions when we're in a place like that. It's hard not to feel completely isolated and alone. And I think there is a lack of understanding that even reinforces that, like you just said. I have this I still go through this thing as I make new friends, or as I start to see new people in like my dating life, or as family kind of finds out about my situation with being so very bipolar, or with my depression, my suicidal ideation, which thankfully I've really recovered from quite well, where it's hard to explain like what bipolar is, you know what I mean? Like, how do I explain this? Is it just like major mood swings, or like being really depressed and really not depressed? How do I explain a manic episode? And it's like that with all mental illness and wellness, because it's not tangible as physical health is. It's not visible like most physical issues are, So I think that people have a really hard time with that, because we're visual beings, as human beings. And
Yeah.
when I did my TED Talk recently, it's on TED Talks channel on YouTube. It's Mackenzie Nicole's mental health odyssey. And it's, after I did the talk at the University of Nevada, I got to kind of mingle with the audience. It was a really amazing opportunity to get to meet all these people and hear their stories, right? And one woman came up to me. She said, both of my daughters were just diagnosed as bipolar, and I don't know how to understand it because I can't see it. I said, you're in the same boat as so many people, you know?
Yeah.
So when we get the chance as artists or as, public speakers or in any field you're in, whether it be, a scientist, like whatever you are and whatever your platform is, to articulate and try and put words and faces and shapes to these problems
Hmm.
or to these conditions, health, wellness, or illness. Um, I think it's really powerful and really important so that we can feel that connectivity with others and try and feel, to understand ourselves and others,
Yeah, I kind of liken it to music. Kind of like, how you pour your story out in lyrics, your feelings, your melodies. And whenever you do that in a really vulnerable, open, honest place, the audience, people connect with that. They're like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling like this for so long. And finally, somebody understands. And like when you're in the depths of it, you feel like nobody understands. You
Yeah.
feel like you're the only person that's experiencing all of these thoughts and these feelings. And I think that's it. It's like you were saying that, like a physical disease, you could see that. But a mental disease, I think it scares people because it affects our brains.
Yeah.
And when it affects our brains, it affects our thoughts and it affects our behaviors. So
Yeah.
oftentimes we can act like not ourselves. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah. And that's scary, not only for or confusing for other people, but it's really scary when you're going through it,
It's very
right?
It's very frightening. And like, I specifically spotlight that mental breakdown I went through. And while it really took place in the first 6 months of 2018, the ball started rolling when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school in 2017. And I was so unlike me. I am I'm a person who is very enchanted by life. I very much romanticize life and I enjoy life when I'm me. But
Mm-hmm.
when I'm not, I am viciously cruel to others. I isolate myself from the people I love. I act out terribly in ways that I'm a very much rule follower. I don't, I'm very much a pretty tame person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, almost to a boring degree. And I am unkind and I am unkind to myself. I do not take care of myself. I like so many things that when I say them here, they don't sound as big as they actually are. You know what I mean? Like when your entire personality changes, for me, whether, speaking from my own experience, whether I be depressed or extremely manic and feel like I'm on top of the world, I am simply not myself and trying to explain that to other people. And once you're better and in recovery, I shouldn't say better, I should say getting better and not perfect.
Right.
Um, when I started recovery, I started doing these apology tours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I had to go around and be like, hey, mom, I'm sorry. Hey, friends that I cut off and was terrible to, I'm sorry. People who I negatively affected with my actions and have major guilt for, I'm sorry. And that also, I think, is something that stops people from entering recovery and things like that, is this subconscious guilt of knowing that recovering means taking accountability for these actions you that aren't you but you can't help. Like there's so many levels to this complexity that is mental illness and tribulations of that sort. um, and yeah, and I think that you're 100% right. It being something that affects the very way you think is
Mm-hmm.
terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It's like how Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger gets into your dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. It feels like this monster, this supervillain, is overtaking your very mental space, which should be a refuge for you. Your mind should be your safe space. And when it's suddenly not, where do you have to go? And so it is scary.
Yeah. And that's it. It's like you feel like you're trapped. And
Oh,
just
yeah.
like you, I mean, I am a positive, optimistic person when when I feel myself. And, I've gone through bouts of depression through my life, but, I'm ambitious, I'm, bubbly and all of these things. But, when you're in the depths of depression or I mean, there was a point too where I was kind of manic, but the depression, you feel like you're trapped. You feel like I felt like I was trapped in a haunted house, trapped by my own thoughts in a dark room. And I would, it's like you could be surrounded by people that you love, but you still, it's almost like their words are in the dark and
Yeah.
that you're there all by yourself. And it's just haunting.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Have you seen my TED Talk?
I have. I saw it 3 times.
Yeah,
I
tell me.
saw it 3 times because I really wanted to just absorb it and really like not only hear the words, but all the emotion behind it.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. The reason I ask is because you brought up the idea of the haunted house. That's something I reference in that because um, you are stuck with yourself 24/7. The place you live, houses change,
Hmm.
cities change, jobs change, but the place that you're always stuck in at sometimes is your mental headspace. And so when it is, this, you know, horrible, terrifying, just horrific place where, you never know when the next jump scare is going to be. You never know when, you're going to step into a new room of frights and deceptions, like it
Hmm.
is insane. And I really, when you fear that, like when you can't even trust yourself, why would you trust other people when they say you're going to be okay? That's the thing that's really hard, and that I try to talk to people about, especially people who are actively suffering, is that, listen, I know if I tell you it's going to get better, you don't believe me. I
Yeah.
know, and I know that you feel completely alone right now, most likely. And the no matter what I say, it's not going to take away that feeling. But the big thing I always try to drive home is that you are not the special case that cannot be solved. That's what I always say. I say, there's something out here, something in this world, someone in this world who can help you. And if it's not in your immediate vicinity, you must keep looking. And if you have no other reason to live, let that be a reason to live, just that search.
Hmm.
And such agony, and it's so hard, but it's that what we keep mentioning is that sense of loneliness and like distrust of self. And those are, I think, some of the biggest issues with mental illness that are the most oppressive.
Right. It's almost like your brain and your mind has become your worst enemy. And one thing that you mentioned is that the first time you felt you had thought about suicide was when you were 6 years old, which is something so hard for me to comprehend. But you also talk about suicidal ideation, and I wanted to see if you could describe what that is and what that was for you.
So when I say contemplating suicide or suicidal ideation, um, I just wrote an article that's yet to come out for Black is New AP Style, really wonderful publication. Um, and the big point of the article is that, without spoiling too much of it, I'll kind of give a brief synopsis, is that suicide was the exit sign on a show never quite bad enough for me to leave.
Hmm.
And it was this security blanket because I knew no matter how bad things get, I always had an out, whether, it was always right there. And so the second I felt bad about anything, my first thought, my first go to was I was going to kill myself. It was
Hmm.
my only coping mechanism from a very young age, from 6 years old. And I had, in retrospect, I now know that that was this raging mental illness I have that, like, I now have under control to an extent with therapy and medication, and a wonderful psychiatrist. But when that was untreated, it made suicide seem like the only way to cope, the only way to get better, right?
Hmm.
And for me, it could be all these intrusive thoughts, right? Like I could be feeling perfectly fine and then realize that, like, get the sudden feeling of the world crashing down on me. And then, beyond, I always mention, one of the things I would do is if I were on a semi empty road, I would just drive and close my eyes for 10 seconds and see if I had wreck or not.
Hmm.
Or there are multiple times where I literally, was seconds from going over the side of a bridge on the interstate and then swerved back into the right lane, you know? There are just these moments I can think of countless times when I should have probably died given my behavior, sitting in the car in my garage and just, you know, wondering when I'd start it and with with all the doors closed. It's just this constant nagging thought of no matter where you are or what you're doing, this urge to just not be here anymore. And again, like, I think that it's just this, more than anything, it's an unhealthy coping mechanism with um, tribulations and trials, um, where anytime you feel, or at least for me, anytime I felt slight discomfort or inconvenience, it would become magnified to a very drastic extent where the answer was suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to explain now, where it seems very dramatic now, but at the time it seemed very rational because it's how I had always thought. So that's what it is to me, and that's what it was to me. I cannot express the gratitude I feel for the fact that I am not dead, or at least severely injured based on some stuff I've done, like ridiculous. But I'm very grateful that I'm here right now, because if you look at the odds, given the fact that for 12 years
Yeah.
I was on the cusp of killing myself nonstop, like, the odds were pretty stacked against me. It's a miracle to me that
Yeah.
I'm even sitting here.
Mm.
That's how it manifested in my life.
What do you think was the closest time that you actually could have committed
Okay.
suicide?
There are a couple. I think that um, there was, during that mental breakdown, I definitely had definitive plans. I had alienated pretty much all my friends. I remember, oh God, sorry, I'm a crybaby.
It's okay. You could cry.
I remember it was right when that all started in January. My best friend Kelly, she went back to high school in San Diego, or I'm sorry, college in San Diego. And I sobbed and sobbed when she left, because I was sure it was the last time I was going to see her, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to kill myself. That was devastating. And like, during that entire period, it was just a series of goodbyes. I had distanced myself from my family, and like, my mom's my best friend. I'm super close with my dad, my brother. He's the light of my life, and I had so effectively distanced myself from all of them. I remember we were moving out of my old house during that period, and my mom was like, okay, like, pick through the stuff you're gonna sell, donate, keep, all this, right? And I just got rid of all my stuff. Thankfully, I recently got to recover most of it, but I just put all my stuff in sale totes, because I wasn't going to use it. I was going to be dead. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I got rid of everything that meant anything to me. I the only people I kept around were people who I knew wouldn't miss me.
Yeah.
And so that period was as close as I got. And um, when that ended, I genuinely felt, and I mentioned this on my album, on the song Pick Out a Cloud, that I had gotten a second chance of life, right? You know, like, I'm here on borrowed time now because I'm not supposed to be here. I very well should be dead given the odds, right? And so that period and so I feel this constant gratitude for the fact that I even have this opportunity to be here, and I have to spend every moment making the absolute most of it, because at any point, like, I always have this constant fear of, like, I could relapse at any time. My meds could stop working. Something could happen. Something tragic could happen that sends me right back to the place I was at. And is that somewhat irrational fear? Yes, but it's still there. So I try to live my life like I have, like, in the best way possible, like everything could end tomorrow. Not in a reckless sense, but in a sense of trying to make sure what I'm doing matters and is worthwhile. So that period was as close as I came to actually killing myself. And it was scary. In retrospect, it's terrifying, you know?
Well, I applaud you for being so strong and, getting to the edge and for whatever reasons pulling back and really trying to find a solution. Um, you said that you suffered for 12 years um, before you got a diagnosis. And, a lot of young adults, a lot of young people are suffering as well. And, it takes time to actually find that diagnosis. How did you survive during those times, that young age, going through mood swings?
The thing that was my saving grace was my mother. My mom is my absolute best friend on this entire planet. We are closer than close. And she's always known about all this with me. She's known my entire life that I've had issues like this, that I was suicidal, that something's wrong. She suspected I was bipolar for a very long time, actually.
Mm.
And so she's very in touch, and she's definitely what has saved me my entire life, is her incredible ability. I can't overstate the absolute tact and skill with which she dealt with all of my issues, and with her, like, she's an incredible parent for that, because she really went through it with me, and I'm sure it was very scary for her. But that was really what saved me. And I know it might not be helpful for people because not everyone has that relationship in their life. But another thing that weirdly kind of saved me, which is a problem in and of itself, is, okay, the first time I went to therapy was for a brief time when I was 14.
Okay.
And when I was diagnosed as severely OCD, which was not surprising because I'd always had, and this isn't OCD like, oh my God, my room is always so clean, like all that. Like, it's like washing my hands till they bled, walking, like only being able to walk in certain patterns across the floor, having to flip light switches a certain number of times, everything from that to obsessive behavior in my everyday life that included like fixating on a certain thing and living every moment of my life for it. So for example, in high school, that thing was getting into a specific college. It was getting into Princeton.
Mm.
And I spent every single second of my life dedicated to doing that. It was everything I thought, everything I, ate, slept, breathed, this one thing, this one goal. And weirdly, that mental issue in and of itself is what probably kept me distracted enough to not kill myself at some points, which sounds really weird, but it's almost like one illness was another illness's saving grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I would get up at 3 a.m. every day, work on homework to like 6:30, drive an hour to school. I went to a wonderful high school called St. Teresa's Academy, and they were also a huge help because it was an incredible environment with incredible people. And I would go to school sometimes till 9 p.m. at night because of all the extracurriculars I was in, stay up till like 12 or 1 doing homework, wake up at 3 the next day. So I really didn't have time to kill myself, honestly. So ultimately, it was these kind of just, I hate to say lucky, I don't believe in luck, but fortunate circumstances of A, having such strong relationship with my mom, and B, having this obsessive personality that kept me so tunnel visioned that I think that it was just enough of a distraction that it didn't make the suicidal thoughts go away and the depression go away, and oftentimes it worsened it, but it kept me dedicated to something. And I think a lot of that dedication was in hopes of a better life for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so well intended, but it ultimately was damaging for me. And now I'm working on, and then after that, after I graduated and didn't go to college, I threw myself into my work. So every moment of every day I was doing music and I was working on the executive side of the company. I was doing this, I was doing that. The breakdown hit, and I went to therapy with my amazing psychiatrist, who I still see at least once a week, and plan on seeing until one of us dies. And yeah. And in recovery, I learned how not to be obsessive and how to enjoy things in a normal way or set normal goals. I shouldn't say normal, but healthy. Healthy is the word I'm looking for. And it hurt me for a long time because I'd never known what it was like to either passively like something or, achieve a goal or set a goal without a tunnel vision. I keep using the word obsession with it. And it made me feel purposeless for a long time. I'm still grappling with that feeling today. And it's been like a year and a half, 2 years almost, of this feeling that if I don't have something I'm thinking about every second of every day, then what am I doing? What's my point here? What am I worth? But then I realized that all of these obsessions and all these distractions kept me from ever knowing who I was. I always say I'm water, right? I'm whatever you put in me or put me in, but I'm nothing in and of myself. I would cast myself as a character, and I would always think, what would Mackenzie do? What would be on brand for her? Instead of thinking, what do I want to do? What do I like? What do I dislike? What are my actual goals? And I let other people project their goals onto me and became that for them. And so now I'm coping with the thing that might have saved me for a long time, and I'm trying to untrain myself doing that, which is trying to figure out who I am and not who I think I should be. So it's a very complex problem. And I think I answered your question in a really long answer, and I'm sorry for the rambling. I'm a talker.
No, that's great. I mean, and I feel like, as you're speaking, well, first I was wondering, because your mom, when you asked her, well, when you told her that you were planning on committing suicide, and you just kind of want to let her know, beforehand,
Yeah.
when you explained it in the TED Talk, she sounded very calm, like, that's not going to happen. And which makes me think, I mean, she of course has been with you this whole time, but has she ever had to deal with any like a family history of mental illness, or were there any other people in her family or your dad's family that ever had to, go through something like what you're going through?
So I know that there is definitely a significant rate of issues with like addictive personality, so alcoholism, drug addiction, things like that on one side of my family. I know that there is bipolar, and at least one family member that I know of, I won't put anyone on blast, high rates of depression in my family. Um, and so there is a history to an extent, but something that I've noticed, despite having that history, is that no one's really talked about it. So it's hard for me to say what the history has or hasn't been, because
Mm-hmm.
I find out through the grapevine that someone was diagnosed as bipolar one time, or someone was diagnosed with depression one time. And, so it's hard to say. My mom, and her handling of that situation, um, like I said, kudos to her for having the most incredible composure of anyone I've ever met in the worst of situations. Like, your child says they're going to die, and you say, no, you're not. Like, who does that? That's incredible. And it wasn't this like blase nonchalantness. It was just a sense of reassurance, you
Yeah.
know, and it was absolutely crazy. So yeah, she's really, I think that the main thing that's trained her for that moment is the idea that she's been dealing with this with me for so long. I think if it were a sudden thing, maybe, and she wasn't prepared for it, maybe that wouldn't have been her response, but she had been waiting like 12 years for that sentence. So
Well, yeah, your mom sounds like a really wonderful, beautiful woman with lots of intelligence and compassion, and so you're both lucky to have each other. Uh, well, one thing I thought was really interesting is when you had your mental breakdown, you went to a friend and talked with them about it, and they suggested to go to a psychiatrist. And your response was, no way, not going to a psychiatrist. I
yeah.
would rather kill myself. But I think it's important to explain that, because there are a lot of people that do that. Just whether it's the fear or the uncomfortability or something about the idea of finding medical help versus killing yourself.
Yeah.
What was going through your head at that point?
So it was so weird. Again, this is one of those things where it's like you turn into a different person, because my entire life I believed in medication. I believed in, psychiatry and therapy, all that. And then I hit this mental breakdown and I was like, nope. It was this feeling of, if I go, then I have to admit something's wrong.
Mm.
And I have to face the music finally. And I can no longer be in denial. I have to search and accept help. And that was terrifying to me, because um I was in, like I said, the word is denial. I wanted to believe, no, this is not, this is my rebellion against the darkness I felt before. Now I'm going to be fine because I'm taking control of it, because I'm going to live the way I want until I eventually kill myself, and it's in my control and I'm doing it. I'm fine. And to cede that control over to someone else and say, listen, I need help, please help me, was felt like admitting weakness. It felt like admitting defeat. And that was a hard thing to grasp. And it it was something that I was just my refusal was out of fear more than anything. It was this idea that, and here was the thing that was really interesting about it, is that I'd have these manic days where I wouldn't be depressed. I'd feel like I was on top of the world, and I'd look my mom in the eyes, or I'd look anyone in the eyes and say, you know what, this is it. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to call the psychiatrist. I'm going to get those appointments set up. I know I need help. I need help. I'm going to get help. I'm going to start taking care of myself. I'm going to stop all this crazy stuff I've been doing. And then the next day I'd be back into a depressive episode and be like, no. that's not me. And it was insane because it was like an out of body experience, because I
Mm.
knew consciously, what am I doing? I've always believed in psychiatry. I've always believed in therapy. I always believed medication was healthy and important. And but I was listening to myself speak and listening and experiencing these beliefs that weren't mine. And it was so surreal trying to reconcile what I knew was myself and this part of me that was true, that was screaming for me to stop. And then the behavior and the part of me that was prominent in taking over, that was stopping me from getting help. And it's just, it's hard. And I think another thing is, we know from other people's stories, from our own experiences, that recovery is hard. It's hard to untrain the behavior you've had, for some of us, our entire lives practically. Or even just for, it might be just a couple months for you, but it's hard to untrain that. It's hard to improve. It's like no one wants to start a diet. No one wants to start going to the gym because it's hard and it sucks. Taking care of yourself is hard and it sucks sometimes. And it doesn't matter if you're going to feel better on the other side of it. It's everything in between now and then that makes you go, oof, no, yuck, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. But I'm really glad that you explained it, because I had another musician say he had an addiction, and he was saying that he knew there was a problem, but he chose the addiction because he was actually running away from the truth. Like, he was in denial, kind of like what you were saying. But in retrospect, he said, I lost 10 years of my life. I was an addict for 10 years. But just that looking in the mirror and knowing that you have to change and accepting the truth. I mean, even, you were kind of different in the sense where when you got diagnosed, you were actually really happy, because it's like, okay, that makes perfect sense to what's going on in my life. And now I finally have an answer. Where there are other people where they're like, okay, you have this. And well, people will go through stages of saying, you know what, I don't have this. I'm fine. I'm okay. And just all of that back and forth. Yeah, you can lose yourself during that back and forth and that struggle.
Absolutely. When he says he lost 10 years of his life, that's something that, to an extent, really resonates with me right now, because I've been feeling a lot. It's one of the things, because like I said, I'm never perfect. And right now, the thing I'm struggling with actively is I'm feeling a lot of anger and bitterness over the fact that mental illness and being sick stole my youth from me.
Mhm.
And I just want to go back. I want to go to prom. I want to go to AP US history. I want to go back to my first day of high school. I want to go experience all this, and I can't. It's gone. And mental illness took that from me, and I was miserable the whole time, and I never actually experienced any of it in a way that I could enjoy it. And that makes me so upset. And I think part of the reason I also refused help was because a piece of me knew that. A piece of me knew that so much was taken from me. And it wasn't my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just the hand I was dealt. And that sucked. And facing recovery would mean I'd have to acknowledge also how much I'd missed out on in
Mhm.
years that I hadn't. And that was rough. That's something that's devastating. I think that's the thing that probably stops a lot of people, if I had to guess, is the idea that when you have to acknowledge that there was a problem, you have to inevitably acknowledge all the things that problem caused and all the things that it prevented, like all the joy it robbed you of. And I will say, though, had I known the sense of relief and joy I would have felt from a diagnosis, I would have went months earlier. I would have went so much earlier to that psychiatrist, because for so long I felt so crazy for so long and so invalidated, because I have this thing that I always joke about. It's my 11:59 syndrome. I was born at 11:59 p.m.
Mhm.
in the rest of my life has continued to be almost, like a second away from always the understudy, always silver medal, always second place. And this felt like another version of that, where it's like I almost have something wrong with me, but it's like not, it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a face, so like it might as well not exist. And so when someone finally said, here, hey, by the way, here's this thing you have. Yes, it exists. Yes, the things that are happening are actually happening. You're not crazy. Your feelings are valid. And what you're going through is absolutely real. that was the biggest relief of my life. Because I think another thing I feared was the idea of going to a psychiatrist, going to someone like that, and then being like, actually, you're good, you're fine. And then I'd have to face this, oh God, this is just how I feel. And there's nothing even wrong with me. I'm just crazy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like it's this complex soup of emotions. And yeah, though, I'm very happy now. I'm the happiest I've ever been, right? And like the last year and a half is the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. And that all started with getting that diagnosis and finally being able to say, okay, this is the beast I'm facing, and this is the way I defeat it.
Okay, so um, a lot of the podcast is about solutions, about,
Yeah.
what you found to be what works for you. So you had already mentioned that you went to a psychiatrist and that you went through some therapy. Is that
Yeah.
true? And
Yeah.
so tell me what your solutions are.
Okay, so I wish I could be one of those people who's like yoga and journaling or something like that. That seems like very hippy dippy and fun. That's not what helped me personally. Honestly, it's very pragmatic, very tactile. My solutions, finding a good psychiatrist, going to therapy. For me, what I need is weekly, and taking the medications I need to take to survive is what solved it for me. And I think those are two things a lot of people are resistant to, especially medications. I think people are afraid. Like I always hear my psychiatrist talking to me. She said she always hears people say, I don't want to use it as a crutch. She said, what do you do if you have a broken leg? You use a crutch. If you have an illness or an injury mentally, you use the crutch that helps that thing, you know? And I think that that's really been what's helped me. And of course, lifestyle changes, actually taking care of myself, trying to find hobbies and outlets, trying to remove toxic people from my life and find the things that spark joy, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
To use that cliche term. And aside from the very like obvious, very literal steps of therapy and medication, I'd say the biggest thing has just been focusing on cultivating who I am, because I never did. And I never, ever, 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 like I said before, knew who I was, what I stood for, what I was like, because I was so busy being sad that like I never figured out what my hobbies were. I didn't know what kind of books I liked. You know what I mean? I didn't know what my favorite food was. Like I didn't know any of these things about myself. So I kind of had to rediscover who this person was, this person that I am was. And when you focus on yourself and curating your personality and your lifestyle, that dedication and that pastime, I think, is largely distracting from being depressed and sad or allowing your illness to overtake you. I'm not going to pretend like I have it figured out. I don't. I just started cognitive behavioral therapy with my psychiatrist, so I'm hoping that's the next step in helping me improve. It's just a constant process, right? And I think the biggest misconception is that you're going to do this one or two or three things and then you're just going to be better and you're going to be fine. But that's unfortunately not the case,
Mhm.
um, I'm sure, and I know you know this of all people, like you're like an expert on this because you have this podcast and this is what you've dedicated your time to. Is it's not a 1 2 A to Z, you know, 2-step journey, it's like a jungle gym, right? Sometimes you make a forward move, sometimes you make a backwards move, sometimes you make a lateral move, but it's all going to get you toward your end goal of being happy. So those are the things that have helped me personally in my everyday life still. And I still struggle, but those are things that I try and dedicate my time to.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the medication and the psychiatrist, of course, and cognitive behavioral therapy. That was something that another one of our guests had talked about, that helped her, in her recovery. But it's true. I think sometimes, especially in the music industry, alcohol, drugs,
Yeah.
there's a feeling like, okay, that's okay, but medication that's been studied and it's been proven to work for bipolar or depression, for these other conditions, and taken years to kind of develop and test, for some reason there's an anti, you know medication kind of thinking sometimes. And that could be your solution, right? Your saving grace, the thing that finally makes you better and balances you out so that you could feel like yourself. And
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that bothers me, my biggest thing that I talk to people about, because obviously, like you said, in the industry, self-medication is a huge, huge problem, is do not self-medicate. Please. Like, that's the biggest thing. If I had to beg everyone who suffers one thing, just please don't self-medicate. And people's argument is always, well, I know myself best. I know what works for me. No, you may know yourself best, but like the doctors, the experts know the illness best. They know the problem best. And that's what you're working on solving. If you specifically were the problem, maybe you'd have the solution, but you're not. There are people who are experts about the problem. And on top of it, like I have a friend who is also bipolar. He suffers a lot with depression, things like that. He was addicted to heroin for 10 years. He was like habitually and like addicted to pot. I know people don't say pot is addictive, but the habit forming is definitely a form of addiction in of itself. You can talk to people who are studied in it about it. It's a huge argument people like to have. And among other things, alcohol. He had a lot of vices, and once he stopped self-medicating, he started into the trial and error business of finding out medications. And that's another thing. People think if the first one doesn't work, or if you have a bad side effects from one, that just means you can't have medication, that doesn't work for you. No, it is a process of trial and error. And it's probably not going to be perfect immediately. In your entire life, you're going to be adjusting it because I used to be on, 3 milligrams of one medication. Now I'm on 4.5. I used to take Lexapro. I don't take Lexapro anymore. It didn't work for me. But that doesn't mean I don't take medication anymore because it just didn't work. One medication didn't work. The next one might. I take Cymbalta now and it works better. It's just a process of substituting, figuring out what side effects you can live with, which ones affect you, which ones don't. And I think that's another thing that discourages people is the idea that it's going to be a major process and a major lifestyle change, especially if they already self-medicate, And so I'm glad you brought that up because that's a huge thing that I always kind of preach is that it's one thing to, I was talking to my psychiatrist. She said, it's one thing if you're like, in a good place with your life, you have a steady job, you have housing, you're pretty established, you got your life together, you're 40, you just got home from work, you want to smoke a joint. That's one thing. But if you turn to pot and alcohol every time you feel a negative emotion and it's your only coping mechanism, that's a problem. And it's distinguishing those boundaries. And especially if you have an addictive personality, which a lot of artists do in particular, a lot of people, but I feel like it's especially artists, I notice. It's just a slippery slope, and it's what originally feels like just a thing you do to relax turns into, well, I'm stressed all the time now, so now I do it a lot, to anytime I feel negative emotions, this is what I turn to. I have to get a drink. And it's hard not to fall into those habits that are really self-destructive. It's proven that self-medicating stunts your emotional capacity to cope if it's how you cope. And these are not just me preaching being an anti-drug prude or anti-alcohol prude. You do what you want to an extent as long as you're not hurting yourself too deeply or hurting others too deeply, or hurting others at all, right? It's just hard to tell someone like, hey, listen, you don't get to make the executive decision on this. You have to put it in someone else's hands.
right. And also, I guess the feeling that you can't be an expert and know everything. I think when we're growing up, we're like, I'll do it myself. I'll do it my way. But it's like, no one knows how to do everything. And, to get to a point where you can just say, you know what, I'm gonna let somebody else who has the experience give me advice. I'm gonna listen. And and
Absolutely.
the other thing that you said is like one of the themes of the podcast is be persistent in finding the mental help that you need, because it is a journey. Just trial and error of medication, trial and error of different therapies. You've got to find what works for you. um and you've got to be, you really do have to be strong, because sometimes it takes a while to find that out, right?
Absolutely.
um
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, there's actually a swab test that I found out about where a medical doctor can take just a swab of like your inside of your cheek
Yeah.
and send it into a lab. And what you do is you get a report back on the medications that tend to work better for you.
That's so cool.
It is completely cool. And I did not believe it until I heard stories about people saying, you know what, I tried these medications that said on the lab test were not quite, wouldn't quite work well with my body. And then I found ones that did, and it, you know, they tended to be on this lab report. Yes, like they got the test after the fact. And so it really convinced me that there is something to, you know, this whole you know, swab testing. I'll have to look up and find out exactly what the name of the test is, but I think that could totally cut time, the time it takes to find maybe the right medications to try out.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. I didn't know anything about that. That's incredible. And like, I think it's exactly that. Like, it's really hard because people think, oh, if the first psychiatrist or therapist I used didn't work, then that means none of them are going to work. If this first medication didn't work, then none of them are going to work. And I think that having some sort of database through this genetic stuff that you just mentioned of, hey, let's kind of cut to the chase and figure out what's going to work for you in the most expedited fashion possible. I think that's great. Another thing that I want to mention when it comes to medication is, especially in the artistic community or in the entertainment community, people worry that it's going to take their creativity away. You know what I mean? That they are going to make bad art if they're happy or if they're feeling better. That's going to turn them into a zombie. And I just want to mention that. The first thing I want to say is if medication turns you into a zombie, it's not the right medication. Get off it immediately. You know, that is not the ideal, right? So that's the one thing, is that's not the goal of medication. It isn't to zombify you. It's to kind of regulate your emotions in a way that's healthy and experientially positive for you. So it's just, that's one thing I want to point out. But also, I have made the best art of my life since I got medicated and got happy. Best of my life. And it's not, you know, to an extent, everyone always jokes that happy people make bad art, right? And yeah, we've all heard our favorite artists get in a really good place in life and kind of like make the happy songs that we're like, ugh, right? And so I get that stereotype and that joke, but in reality, I am more creative now than I ever have been because I can actually take time and dedicate it to my craft and not just being miserable and trying to survive constantly and being in fight or flight survival mode nonstop. So that's a big thing I want to mention, because that's a big thing I have to tell people all the time when they ask me, because I've had a lot of listeners, now that I've spoken out on this subject, come to me and I give the best help I can without pretending to be, you know, a whiz on it and be a medical professional, because I'm not. And in my experience, like, it's just that, you know, your creativity is not going to be negatively impacted by becoming happy. If anything, I truly believe that you'll make your best work. So that's something I just want to mention.
That's a great point. And your new album, Mystic, is all about your journey, you know, and I listened to the lyrics and the melodies, and you just pour your emotions and your heart out into each song, which I really love. And you've broken it down into 3 different chapters. And I wanted you to let everyone know, what are the chapters and what do they represent?
Okay, so I'm really glad you asked. This is a huge part of this album, obviously. When I set out to do Mystic, my goal was to tell my story. And when you're an artist, there's this almost like self-indulgent, almost masturbatory type of tendency to just indulge the darkness, right? Just dive into it and dwell there and make that your art, right? Because darkness is like very seductive as an artist. But at the end of the day, if I just make an album about the darkness, what moral of the story is there? What message is there except, hey, I want to kill myself too? That doesn't provide you any solutions. That doesn't provide you any insight or any hope. So I wanted to discuss the whole journey, not just the bad parts. So the first chapter is the first 4 songs. It's called The Rabbit Hole, and it's about being at absolute rock bottom. It's about my very, very worst. And it is that darkness that I dwelled in for so long. It is about, you know, abusive relationships with yourself and others, for lack of better terms. And then after that, we move into the second chapter, the second 4 songs. It's called Purgatory, and it's transitional. It is about that step between bad and better and the choice to get better. And that's the hardest part of all this, is the choice to get better. We talked about that already. And it's about acknowledging and articulating what's happening to you and the fear and the negativity, and just validating your own feelings and then making the choice to actively change what you're experiencing in your lifestyle. And then finally, the final 4 songs is a chapter called Oxygen. And that's because that's what I always say, it's because what recovery felt like to me was this huge breath of air after being held underwater for so long and having someone sit on my chest for so long. And it's about being on the other side, whatever that means, right? I always say not perfect, but better. It's about experiencing recovery, the good and the bad of it, the hope, the fear of relapse, the closure of recovery. And what I hope people get from this album being divided into these 3 chapters is that it is, I hate using the term journey because it's cheesy, right? But it is a journey. It is a whole multi-part odyssey, right? And it's not just the darkness, it's not just the light, it's that and everything in between. So that was the point of the 3 chapters.
Well, thank you for providing the depth in your album, because it's like, everyone, it's good to see all the colors, right, of the journey. And one thing that you mentioned was recovery. And when you normally think about recovery, you think about, okay, everything is getting better, but there are parts of the transition that can be difficult. What are some of the great things about recovery, and what are some of the things that you really were kind of struggling with during
Yeah.
recovery?
So I already mentioned some of the great things, like the biggest thing was validation. I thought acknowledging it would be admitting fault on my part, right? Acknowledging the darkness, acknowledging the suffering. And I thought that it would make me feel worse because I'd have to talk about it and I'd have to admit it, right? But then I realized I wasn't admitting some dirty secret, right? I was telling what I went through and being told in response that it was okay, that it wasn't shameful, and that it wasn't something I needed to hide and keep to myself. And so that was majorly changing. That was beautiful. Another thing is getting the opportunity to actually experience life, and not, because I think that one of the things that, at least with me, was a major problem was I never ever enjoyed anything, because like I said before, I was always in fight or flight survival mode. And it was either I was viciously fighting to feel okay, or I was going to get out of here. I was going to kill myself. I was going to off myself. And that was it. And I never had time to sit and to slow down, smell the roses, enjoy the things that I would naturally enjoy. Like I said, I'm very romantic with life. I'm very enchanted, and I didn't get to enjoy the things that I enjoy when I'm me. I'm back to that. I can be happy again in that respect. So those are a few of the really joyous things. Some of the harder things were, of course, going through the medicinal adjustments. That can be hard because it's dealing with your brain chemicals, and something may work for a while, then stop working as well, and you got to adjust that. And there have been times where I've talked to my psychiatrist. I'm like, I feel like I'm walking in circles. Like, I feel like I'm never going to get better. And she says, what are you saying? Like, no, you've made so much progress. Like I said earlier, she's the one who told me life is like a jungle gym. Sometimes you have to make a backwards move, sometimes you make a forwards move, sometimes you make a lateral move, but no matter what, you're going to get to the end. That's the goal. And it always isn't always just charging forward, And so that was one thing that was hard for me to deal with at first. And now I'm getting better at dealing with, because I realize it's a necessity. It doesn't mean I'm failing. It means that it's just another step in the process. Something that is hard, probably the hardest part, is the bitterness of knowing how much I missed out on. That's something I was talking about earlier, and something that's really negatively affecting me right now in my life, because I'm really feeling it, is I feel so cheated out of so much of my life. But then I remember, this is the thing that carries me during this period, is that I'm 20. I missed out on a lot, but I'm only 20. And I'm going to experience so much more than I missed out on. This is like the ratio of what I missed out on to what I'm not missing out on is so incredibly just immeasurably different, So that's how I encourage myself when it comes to looking back And I think part of the trick is not to dwell on it too much, not to stare back at the past too much, and not to dwell on the future either and be afraid. Because that's another thing, is that fear of relapse that I talk about in my album, where I'm like sitting every day and I'm like, what if I went back there? And now that I know how happy I can be, what if I was sad again? And then I'd have this knowledge on top of being sad that I could have been at one point happy. And then I realized I can't count on things going poorly. Like, I can't anticipate the worst. I can anticipate the best and deal with the worst if it comes.
Mhm.
And now the difference is that I know that I'm capable. So for every con, there is a pro. It's like I said, fear of relapse, but knowledge that you're capable and faith in yourself and trust in yourself. It is bitterness towards what you missed out on, but hope and joy on what you will experience. And, you know, fear of like the technical aspects of it, like maybe I need to find a new psychiatrist at some point, maybe I need to try new medications, and then realization that you're strong enough to do it, you know. So they balance each other out, I truly believe, which is what makes recovery worth it, is that there are far more pros than cons, and the cons have, there's two sides to those coins.
Well, I think that sometimes the universe or God or whoever you want to say can push us to the edge. And if we're strong enough to come back from it and learn from that, I mean, I just feel like, um, what you're doing now, you've got such purpose behind it. And it's such a wonderful purpose, and you're doing it so beautifully. Um, and, one thing I think to remember is that they say when people get diagnosed with a mental condition, sometimes it could take an average of 10 years for them to finally get that diagnosis. And there are
Yeah.
some people that never get that diagnosis. They never go to try and get help. And, you can only, kind of empathize with those people that, for whatever reasons, never sought out to, find what can work for them and make their life better. But I'm glad you're on this wonderful journey and that you're helping so many people, especially young people. They say that, like, they did a study of like 1,500 musicians, and they found that 8 out of 10 younger musicians, like in your age range, have suffered through some, mood disorder or symptoms of it. Depression, anxiety, bipolar, and you speaking out is going to help normalize the conversation. And that's really what we need to do, right? Is just to make it normal, in the sense where, if you have your broken leg, you go to the doctor, you don't even think twice about it, you go get help.
Exactly. You know, just expanding that dialogue and making it okay. You know, it's been stigmatized for a long time. It's going to take a while to undo all of that, but the more of us that talk about it, the more we're going to get used to talking about it. So thank you so much for those very high compliments and that high praise, because that means the world to me. I'm doing this more than anything. You know, I did this to help myself, and helping other people has been the most beautiful, unexpected byproduct. It's been really amazing. So, and I love experiences like this where I get to talk to people who also are dedicated to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, your album Mystic actually dropped on Valentine's Day, which I noticed, which is so appropriate. And I also read about, you have like a film that's going to be released. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. So for ending last Friday, starting January 17th, ending last Friday. I'm sorry, that does not make it evergreen. Ending on Friday, the 3rd of April. There was this beautiful, amazing experience called the Mystic Film Series. And it's going to be released. It was 12 parts, a music video, so to speak, or a video for each song on the album. And it will be released as one full film soon, and at some point in the future. And the point of these visuals is this. Okay, so the main character of the visuals, people will notice if they look at them. I'm blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and the visuals, dark hair, dark eyes. What does that mean? Well, it's because the person in the visuals is not me.
Mhm.
The person in the visuals is the girl. And the entire 12-part video series, in which becomes the film, is entirely about her and her story. And here's why we did that. So a few different things happened that encouraged this thing, right? First of all, I always say that I didn't create Mystic. It existed somewhere in the universe independent of me. I just happened to be the person who found it and brought it to light. And as I was writing this album, all of a sudden I realized hidden in these words and hidden in these melodies was not only my story, but the story of someone else. And it would reveal itself piece by piece. I'd be driving and think, and another piece would occur to me. I'd be writing, another piece would occur to me. And I realized there was an entirely separate person, and I named her the girl. Well, I didn't name her that, but the universe brought her to me as that. And I learned her story slowly but surely. And I realized that I had to tell more stories than just my own, because some people are going to be able to relate to this content through me, but there are going to be people who don't like me, who don't find me relatable, and I think they should have access to the content too, and they should be able to enjoy the music too. And maybe if they can't relate to me, their next way up the mountain is the girl. And she and I went through the same exact thing. We went through a mental breakdown in entirely different ways. And she, for every song, we see her relationship with herself, her relationship with others, her addiction issues, her, suicidal behavior, her self-destructive behavior. And then as the visuals progress, we see how her personal story progresses through that, how she copes with it, how she deals with it. And that's really what the visual is about. And it was an incredible experience getting to do this, because I realized so much about myself through this secondary character who is so, like, spending time with her as her was remarkable. It was a beautiful experience. And so far, people have been really receptive and really kind about the experience with the film so far and with the videos so far. And I think that it's been a really remarkable experience. I'm really excited for more people to discover it and enjoy it, or hopefully enjoy it, I should say, because it is probably it is equally as important as the songs themselves. This visual is. It is just as important as the music itself.
Wow, I cannot wait to see it.
Thank you.
It's really nice. I think that sounds fantastic. Well, is there anything else that you want to say about mental health or about your new album, Mystic?
Yeah, so I guess if I had to give any remarks, I'd say that first of all, I just want to thank everybody for listening, like I said earlier, to anything I have to say, because I'm no expert on anything. I'm just speaking on what I've experienced. And with Mystic, that is like pinnacle that, and I thank everybody who's taken time out of their lives to even experience any of this. But if I had to say one thing about mental health, one more thing, I'd say that everyone who is hearing us, everyone who's not hearing us, everyone on this planet is capable of happiness. Everyone is capable of happiness, whether it feels that way or not. And so our journey in life, I think, more than anything, is just trying to achieve that happiness. And it's not easy, but it reveals itself day by day if you work hard for it. And some of us have to sometimes work a little harder than others. Just that's the hand we were dealt. But you are capable, and that's what I would like to leave off.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Yeah, I'm just excited to be here.
Okay.